Hi, I'm Liz Pagano, and I'm the editor of the Austin Monitor. This is the fourth City Council candidate forum that we've held with KUT this election cycle, as part of an effort to let voters get to know their would-be representatives at City Hall. This is the penultimate forum in the series. On Monday, we will hold the last forum for District 10, but tonight we turn our focus to District 7, which is the Northwest North Central District in Austin. Councilmember Leslie Poole has been the representative for District 7 since her election in 2014. Morgan Witt is her only challenger in the race. And today we're happy to have both candidates with us. Hi, thanks for coming. But first we should go over some rules that we ask of the candidates. First, we ask that there are no personal attacks. It's fine to critique like a policy, but not like the person, individual. No offensive language or gestures. Neutral or non-intrusive backgrounds, don't run over your time, and stay out of the chat. And okay, the structure of the discussion will be that each candidate gets 90 seconds for an opening statement. Then we'll get into questions, which are a mix of questions that we've written and questions from the public. You'll have 60 seconds to answer each question. You'll get 30 seconds of rebuttal if a candidate mentions you or your policy by name, and then we'll do a minute of closing statements. The whole thing should be about an hour, although there's only two of you, so like maybe it'll be shorter. And all I ask is that you stay within your time, and we'll alternate people like each question, and we're going to start with the ballot order. So that means Morgan, you're first.
All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Morgan Witt, and I'm running for City Council in District 7 because I believe Austin needs a new leader with a proven track record of community advocacy, who's tuned into the community and who brings fresh ideas to the table to tackle our long-standing and often worsening problems. I live here, I grew up here, I have firsthand knowledge of the struggles faced by many who live in Austin, including myself. There are a lot of people who are affected much worse than I am. And through my work in education and advocacy and extensive volunteering efforts, I've seen the steep challenges that a lot of people face with really basic things like just making a living in Austin or accessing resources or accessing local leaders. And these experiences have shown me how badly we need leaders who are more in touch with the communities that they serve. COVID-19 hasn't made new problems, but shown us these aren't new issues, but actually made them more visible, shown us how long they've been around and that they're getting worse. Rent is getting more and more expensive, the commute is getting longer, and a lot of voices in our community are still going unheard. District 7 needs bold leadership who's going to make Austin a more livable and affordable city for everybody and more inclusive. We don't need maintenance of the status quo, and we don't need incremental small changes that yield little results, as we have seen. And that's what I'll do as councilwoman for you. I'll bring effective solutions to address the root causes of our issues here in Austin, and I'll work together with all residents of my community to make sure everybody gets to live the Austin experience.
Okay, thanks. And I don't think I mentioned this at the beginning, but I'll go like this when you have about 10 seconds.
I'm so sorry. I saw like a little bit of motion, but I wasn't sure if that's what that was. I apologize if I
blended with this background, actually. Okay, Leslie.
So sorry.
No problem.
Thanks, Liz. Hi, everybody. I'm Leslie Poole, the council member for District 7. Since being elected 6 years ago, I've fought hard for District 7 and all of Austin, and I'm running for re-election because the work is not yet done, especially at this critical moment. From the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic devastation to police brutality and deep-rooted racial inequities to the urgency of the climate crisis to affordability and rewriting the land development code, the challenges we face are massive, they're complex, and they're immediate. During these extraordinary times, our city needs leaders who are ready to face these challenges with the experience, knowledge, and skill to lead our community through the difficult months and years ahead. I have a proven record of strong leadership on progressive initiatives, having lived in this city for 40 years. And government accountability and building strong communities are my core values. To pivot really quickly to endorsements, you all may be interested to know that I've been endorsed by about 15 different organizations now. A number, if the important Democratic clubs and the unions, the Central Labor Council, and all the major Democratic clubs in Travis County. I think what you're most interested in is my record, what I've done while on council. I do have a quick overview of that record, but it looks like I may be running short of time. Is that right?
Yes.
Liz? Okay, well, maybe one of the questions can be what our legislative records look like. I think that that's important because that is what we are going to be voting on.
Maybe there'll be a chance later on.
That would be great. Thanks so much.
Or maybe you can work it into this next question, which we'll start with you, Leslie. And what do you see as the most important issue facing District 7 in 2021?
Well, there's 3 top issues that I think are really important. The first one is economic resiliency, and that's as we grapple with and emerge from the pandemic. And we've worked really hard on the council to distribute relief throughout the community since March. And so continuing to provide financial relief programs to those most affected, most disproportionately affected by the pandemic, and building on all of our COVID-19 work to date would be one of the top 3. The second is environmental quality, like our land, our water, our air, our solar. The resolutions I brought on climate resilience and the Green New Deal were my attempt to initiate those changes into law, and I was successful. I've worked on flood mitigation, and flood and drought are a part of Austin's history, and we have to be prepared for these extremes because we don't know when they'll hit us. And the third one is systemic reform. My resolution on community resilience and the budget adoption work, the proposals I brought for reimagining the police department in the fiscal 21 budget. Rebuilding policing is the first of what should be a series of deep dive audits to our policies and procedures on racism and discrimination.
Okay, thanks. I know a minute's really short, so I'll try to be better at interrupting. But Morgan, what do you see as the most important issue facing District 7 in 2021?
Yeah, so I believe the most urgent issue facing District 7 is what I call livability. And there are a lot of factors that play into that. That's affordability and housing. That's access to affordable transportation options besides just a car. That also includes the ability to live in a healthy environment. And some of the most fundamental things that we're talking about right now, like redeveloping the land use code, Project Connect. We have to do all of these things in tandem together to really address the livability issue. As I said, incremental change, changing one without the other, is going to yield limited success for us. But the underpinning of livability is equity. So yes, social and police reform is important, but how in a broader sense are we making sure that people have access to the community services that they need? How do we make sure that that's being equitably distributed? But also, how are we making sure that we have equitable community input in all of our planning and decision-making processes? There is a very big lack of representation from communities of color and other marginalized communities in these conversations right now.
Oh, well, that's a good transition into our next question, actually, and we'll start with you. There has been concern and criticism about how little reach the city has within communities of color, especially non-English speaking communities. What are your suggestions for improving relationships and communication with those communities?
Yeah, there are a couple of ways that we can do that. I think that offering translated services from the city should be baked into all communication, education, and marketing materials that come out from the government. But we also need to make sure that the local government is partnering with organizations, agencies, and community leaders to make sure that this information is getting assimilated fairly into these communities. And we also need to step away from this like wait and see approach of community input. We need to be much more proactive about going out and collecting it. If you look at the 2012 Imagine Austin plan, there is huge disproportionate representation of white residents who participated in that forum, and disproportionate lack of representation from the Hispanic and Latinx community. So again, we need to be more proactive and responsive in the way that we approach this situation.
Okay, thank you. Leslie, same question. How would you
Sure.
prioritize that?
One of the first resolutions that I brought when I was first sworn in 2015 was a community engagement, a resolution to create a task force on community engagement. The council wanted to measure what the communications into and out of City Hall were like and what recommendations might the stakeholders have to improve on that. Some of the conversation, so it was a really successful task force. They issued a report, and over the last 5+ years, we have instituted and adopted a number of those recommendations. And one of the big ones was increasing the number of languages. This is something that Morgan touched on, the translation services. We actually have ramped up the number of languages, particularly in the Asian community. So that, and you might have noticed our Twitter feed shows Vietnamese and I think Chinese in our Twitter feed. I had engaged directly with Austin's Asian community, which is incredibly diverse, to work on expanding our access to competent and certified interpreters. And of course, that's the key point. You can't have just anybody do the interpretations they do. Those translations have to be done by people who have certifications in and professional credentials. So to the extent that we have been able to identify those folks and they're available and willing to do the work, we bring them on with contracts.
Okay, thank you. Have to be better about keeping time, obviously. Leslie, how would you characterize the city's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic? And what, if anything, do you think the city should be doing differently?
Right. Well, I talk about Austin with the lens of 6 to 7 months after September, when we made that fateful decision to cancel the recommendation to South by Southwest that they cancel South by Southwest. And I've been thinking about it in this way. Austin is a really high touch, highly interactive community. There's a lot of community back and forth. We have significant attendance in person at City Hall and chambers when we have meetings. We have task forces. We have more than 60 commissions and boards. There's a lot of interaction and engagement and participation by the community. So, and our service delivery is the same way. And then all of a sudden, everything stopped and we went remote, and it was distanced and away. And the pivot that our professional staff made under the direction of the city manager and with our guidance, I think was commendable and has made all the difference in keeping our spread low.
Yeah. Morgan, same question.
Yeah, the city's COVID response to me is one example of many of this reactive attitude toward the problems that we face, and this sense of good intentions with limited and sometimes counterproductive impact. So absolutely, we should have gone into lockdown to protect people's safety and health. But you can't lock down an economy and not provide relief for people. And you can't do it without making sure that our most vulnerable communities have access to the PPE, the testing, and the resources that they need. Our Latinx and Black communities continue to suffer at disproportionate rates from COVID, and they have been calling for support for months. Our music industry was the first to get shut down and is going to be the last to reopen. Yes, we're talking about getting funding now, but how long till that funding runs out, and then what? And then we have to talk about the homeless community, right? They've been also disproportionately impacted by this. And how are we making sure that they're being housed and that they still have access to the services and resources that they need? So we kind of find ourselves in a situation where we're scrambling to take care of things that we could have been better prepared for. Mm-hmm. And, you know, to the point of making this more accessible. Oh, I'm so sorry. Did you have your hand up? Okay.
Yeah. It's a little over.
So sorry, I didn't see it.
You did mention the response or lack of response to helping the music venues in town. Where was that question? What is your position on keeping Austin the live music capital of the world? And will you help fund music venues and pay funds to musicians who bring tourism to Austin? And also, I would say how. That was a question from the public. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a very passionate patron of the live music scene. A lot of my favorite venues have actually been shut down over the last few months. So it's been heartbreaking to see people lose economic opportunity, but also kind of a sense of identity as their industry is closing. And like I said, you know, we are scrambling to address this problem, but as the live music capital of the world, we should be the gold standard for having a dedicated music preservation fund and making sure that we have ongoing dedicated investment in this community. Um, there have been steps toward it, but not just how do we come up with the funding? How are we also making sure that that money is equitably distributed to across music venues, across musicians, and across the other industry professionals who often don't get a lot of love or recognition. So the hotel occupancy tax is definitely something that we should look into, and we need that dedicated preservation fund to make sure that this is long-term investment in this community.
Okay, thank you. Leslie, what would you do to help or not help? I mean, you get the choice, the music industry in town.
Specifically, yeah, I was a principal co-sponsor on the resolution that we brought at our last meeting. It was the Save Austin's vital enterprises, economic sectors, saves Austin's vital economic sectors. And the point there was to cover those small businesses, the independent restaurants, our musicians, the music venues, and childcare were included in it too, that had somehow been missed or hadn't gotten sufficient relief from the funds that we've already distributed. Did you know we've distributed about $300 million in relief since March? I mean, the way some people talk about it, it sounds like we haven't done anything. So unlocking the reserves at the convention center is a difficult job, but that is what I'm focused on doing. We have an array of other potential sources of money. Staff found about 10 million that I think council is willing to distribute at our meeting tomorrow, but our work isn't done, and my allies and I will be continuing to dig into the issue to find additional funds.
Thank you. Leslie, there's been concern and criticism about, oops, that's the earlier one, sorry. Recently, after protests decrying local and national police violence, City Council made a commitment to reimagine public safety. What does that goal mean to you, and what issues should be prioritized in your opinion?
What it means to me is returning our police department to their core values and their core mission, which is public safety. They should be guardians, not warriors. To that end, I was one of the three main council members who brought the proposals to reimagine and reform the police department budget. The cuts that we made were $21.5 million with some additional funds that the city manager had also cut in his draft budget. We didn't cut $150 million, although that's a cudgel that Governor Abbott has liked to use against the city of Austin. We did shift funds into transition accounts so that when we, for example, make the forensic science lab independent, the money is there, but that work isn't going to stop. But what we did do is that,
I'm sorry, there's like 10 more seconds, but.
Okay, what we did do, as everybody knows, is we took the unexpended balances and the unfilled vacancies. We didn't change any about the numbers of the officers that are on the street. There may be time to dig into that a little bit more, but there's been a lot of coverage on what we did do and what we didn't do. And I was one of the council members who led on those changes during the budget.
Morgan, what does reimagining public safety mean to you, essentially?
Yeah, reimagining public safety to me is a true commitment to systemic social reform, not just within law enforcement and APD, but across all systems that, you know, help Austin function. And I want to focus on the commitment part. Right. The APD budget that passed was in a really important first step, but we also need to talk about the actual implementation of some of those intentions, making sure that they're implemented in a timely and effective manner. But we also have to look at where is the dedicated commitment to that? The community has been calling for change for years. Police violence and lack of accountability and transparency are not new. And yet the police budget has almost doubled in the last 4 to 6 years. with little correlation to crime, as we saw from Audrey McGlinchey's recent article. So I want to see that, and I want to see commitment to systemic, equitable change in all areas, not just within the police department.
This is a really big topic, so I'll ask another question to give you guys a chance to sort of round out your thoughts. Do you agree with the decision to shift fund to reduce the APD budget?
Do you want me to start with that one?
Yeah.
Okay. I do. And the reason is because it's well documented that when you invest in your community and you invest in the services that help people thrive and prosper in the community, crime goes down. There's people's well-being and health are improved. To the point of Audrey McGlinchey's recent article today about spending on police and crime, there's no correlation between the two. And so at the end of the day, we really need to think about two things. One, what are we doing to support everybody in our community? And two, what works? We need to be using data to inform our decisions and make sure that we are effective in supporting the community and also keeping it safe.
Thank you. Leslie, same question.
Sure. Obviously, I led on those cuts and voted for them. So yeah, I was one of the leaders in making those changes. I did get an update just this afternoon from the city manager with regard to the training academy. That is one of the areas that I had specifically been pressing the urgency with the city manager on the rewriting of that curriculum. And he has gotten an update. This is a public memo, so I'm not sharing something that you wouldn't get otherwise, but it looks like there is good progress being made on the internal audit review of the academy. And it looks like priority actions and timeline will be offered to us soon, and that includes the Office of Police Oversight and Equity Office. Looks like that update and review will be completed by January 2021. And then it goes on to talk about the Reimagining Public Safety Update. We will have a September report, and I guess this is September 30th, so that sounds like it's legit. Anyway, the point is, the public may not be seeing the work that's being done, and that is as it should be. This work is difficult and it's nuanced and it's important and complex, and it needs to be done the way. I think the staff is doing a great job with the difficult challenges in front of them.
Now, totally pivoting to another huge topic. Do you support Proposition A, which is on the November ballot, that would raise city taxes in order to fund a 7.1 billion mass transit rail system that's commonly known as Project Connect?
I do. I support Project Connect and Prop A, and there are three elements to it. It's the system plan, it's the governance structure, and it's the financing scheme, which is the 8.75 pennies that you talked about. I want to point out that some people are misreporting the increase in taxes. The tax rate is going up 25%, but your taxes are not going up 25%. And that's because the city of Austin is just one of 5 taxing entities. And our share is about 22 to 23% of the total bill. And we all know that AISD has the lion's share of over 50%. Prop B, which you may also want to ask about.
I'll ask about it next, so don't stress.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I did have some thought process about, is now the time to bring it? Because when we were making the votes, we were in the middle of the pandemic, but it was clear to me that our reasons for bringing a more mature transit system had not shifted, and I was encouraged by the fact that this is a vote of the public, so the voters will get the final say on whether we move forward.
Thanks. Morgan, your feelings on Prop A?
Yes, I absolutely support it, and I'm happy that after decades-long conversations about traffic in Austin, we have something on the table that will hopefully address it. But as I mentioned earlier, my focus is not just implementing Project Connect. We need to do it equitably, and we need to do it effectively. In District 7 specifically, we have a lot of communities in the northern areas around Tech Ridge, Parmer, and Lamar, but even further south along the Burnett Corridor, where we need more public transit infrastructure, especially on the outer limits of the city. those people tend to rely more heavily on public transportation and have the least amount of access to it. But if we are also going to do this effectively, we need to make sure that we build our housing around it so that people are connected to the transportation that they're using and are incentivized to use it. Otherwise, we're going to continue to rely on cars and spend a lot of money on a project that people don't end up using.
And speaking of things that are not cars, but are transportation, what is your opinion on Proposition B, which is the $460 million active transportation bond that will dedicate funds to sidewalks, trails, and bikeways and other safety improvements?
Yeah, I'll kind of reiterate what I just mentioned about the fact that especially in District 7, there are areas of the district that are missing a lot of basic infrastructure like sidewalks. And if we want to move away from cars, reduce congestion, improve our air quality, and battle climate change, we have to incentivize people to use alternatives. And that's not just rail and bus, that includes bikes, that includes walking. So this is a very comprehensive, multi-pronged approach to kind of reorienting the way that people live in Austin and the way that people get around Austin.
Thank you. Leslie?
Yep, I voted for Prop B to put that on the ballot as well. We have, decades-long growth where the city council did not require developers to lay down sidewalks when they were laying out subdivisions and so forth. And so we've really had to step up in order to make up those deficits. But I think we're doing a good job. The quarter-cent monies, the $2 million that each one of us got back in 2015 from overages from Cap Metro was spent really strategically throughout each district. And I'm really proud of the projects that were completed in District 7, protected bikeways and safe routes to school, and repairs to sidewalks to make them easy for people with disabilities to get around. So those sorts of things will never be completely finished because there's always maintenance, but I think that the city's doing good work in that area.
Leslie?
Yes.
What is Austin doing to minimize emissions and combat climate change, the effect of which are already threatening our water, land, and residents through drought, storms, and extreme heat? That is a big question. Maybe a smaller question is, under your leadership, what, if anything, will the city do differently?
Well, environmental legislation has been a hallmark of my almost 6 years on the council. I brought the updates to the Austin Energy Resource Generation Climate Protection Plan in 2015 and 2017, and that included the advances in solar and making sure that we had reduced our emissions by 2050. Climate plan, the community climate plan, I brought that in 2017. Austin's climate protection plan and Green New Deal was last year. Austin's community resilience plan that I mentioned earlier was this year, and that we now have a community resilience officer in the equity office to work on making sure that we can bounce back from the kind of dislocations that a pandemic brings, because we know that it will happen again. It's happened in the past, it'll happen again. I commissioned a feasibility study on biomethane and the measures that the Texas Gas Service can take to reduce natural gas leaks, those emissions. And then in the area of trying to reduce concrete and tech stop projects, I voted against the Oak Hill flyover, which is a 12-lane flyover, lots of concrete going in at the Y. And there were only 2 of us on the council that voted against that. It was me and Councilmember Kassar. Just too much concrete.
Morgan? Same
Yeah,
question.
I think environmental protection and addressing climate change is another one of those areas where we've seen some incremental changes, but we're not addressing the fundamental systemic issues that are facing us. We have to recognize that all of our transportation and housing systems are not only designed inequitably, but are based out of industrialization. So if you look at things like the climate equity plan, it's almost completely focused on electric cars. That's not reorienting the way we travel around the city. We have to make public and active transportation more accessible and more affordable. We have to invest in things like electric bikes, but we also have to be looking at the way that we're developing. If we continue to sprawl over the hill country, we're going to be doing exponentially more damage to the environment than if we do thoughtful, environmentally friendly, and equitable development within our city limits. So, you know, again, we have these nice attempts, but we need to be more systemic in the way that we think about environmental justice and climate change.
Okay. Morgan, pivoting to what was once called Code Next, the city's journey to rewrite the land development code has been long, it's years long, and it's currently stalled in court. How important is it to you that we restart that process soon? And how should the city approach that process when and if they pick it up again?
It's extremely important because if we're going to be thinking about how we make Austin a more livable and equitable city for everybody who's living here, housing is a big part of that. And we need to recognize that our land development code was not designed to be inclusive or to allow organic development of neighborhoods. It was designed to exclude, to segregate, and to discriminate. So we have to make changes to that. And in order to do that, we really need to focus on fair housing and community input. Fair housing means that our neighborhood plans need to have in their bylaws language around fair housing. Only one neighborhood plan right now has something about fair housing. And as far as community input, we need to ensure that everybody in the community has input. Right now, less than half of neighborhood plans are approved by more than 1% of the neighborhoods that they represent. In fact, in one of them, only 19 people participated in voting in a plan that affected 13,000 people. So how are we being more equitable in the way that we gather community input?
Leslie, are you eager to dive back in?
And so the question was, do I?
The land development code rewrite is currently stalled. How important is it to restart that process, and how should the city tackle it once it's restarted, or if it's restarted?
It's pretty divisive, and rightly so. For example, the transition areas that were discussed in Code Next and in LDC 2.0, they were exceedingly problematic. I didn't support how staff was imposing them. They were doing it without residents' agreement. And the adoption process was being done in violation of Texas statutes, despite clear evidence and rhetoric pointing this out to city legal. They were very aware. Judge Seufer's ruling is on appeal. I did not agree with sending good money after bad to challenge that ruling. It's in one of the district courts in Houston, not for any particular reason, just because they're reassigning dockets because of COVID. But we should probably hear sometime early in 2021 on that ruling. But there's no case law that the city legal could bring to back up their contention that a comprehensive rewrite of the land development code did not require notice or protest rights. Those are fundamentals in state law, and at the least we can do is follow the state law.
Okay. Sort of on the same topic, if that topic is housing, how would you define affordable housing, and what would you do to implement it in the city?
Affordability is variable depending on where you are on the economic spectrum. In the situation in Austin, we've been trying to incentivize developers to provide low-cost rents or low-cost housing for decades. But because of state statute, we don't have the ability to require that low-cost housing be built. And we can't require where it will be built. That's, we're prohibited from inclusionary zoning requirements. So last session in 2019, I worked with Representative Gina Hinojosa to bring a bill that would overturn the 2005 prohibition on inclusionary zoning. That bill didn't pass. It was assigned to a committee, but it didn't get a hearing, and we weren't really surprised, but we're gonna try again. It's in the city's official legislative agenda. So we're hoping to overturn the ban on inclusionary zoning that would require developers to have to abide by the, it wouldn't be an incentive program anymore. We wouldn't have to buy down the rents. Developers would have to provide them. That's really about the only way we're going to be able to get large numbers of affordable housing in our city.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Morgan, same question.
Yeah, for me, there are two categories of affordable housing. There's market rate housing, which simply needs to be more affordable. We can address that by easing zoning restrictions, and streamlining the permitting and development process so that it's more accessible, more affordable, and less time expensive, I'll say. And we also need to make sure that that's equitably distributed across the city. We need, the west side of the city needs to take its fair share in that development so that we can mitigate some of the gentrification and displacement we're seeing on the east side. But then there's also capital A, capital H affordable housing. And to the council member's point, there are restrictions at the state level about what we can do about that, but we can't wait for the state to make a decision about it. We can still be creative in the ways that we incentivize and bake affordable housing into our development right now so that those who are below the median family income can afford to live in Austin and can afford to live near the resources and the transportation infrastructure they need to work, to access family, and to access the services that they require.
So we did take questions from the public, and probably the majority of those questions were about homelessness and those suffering from homelessness or suffering from experiencing homelessness. And so the next couple questions are from the public. I just want to make that clear because the word I is used and it's like not me. The question is, I'd like to know what candidates propose to alleviate the growing homelessness situation, especially if Governor Greg Abbott overrides the council's budget plan to shift funding to social work. Although I've supported council's decision to stop arresting poor people, it's not sustainable. And Morgan?
Yeah, I have two ways that I want to answer that. Absolutely, we should decriminalize homelessness. It's not only cruel and unusual to criminalize people for not having any other options, but it also makes it more difficult for those experiencing homelessness to reintegrate into society. So we need short-term solutions. We need to make sure that the assets that the city bought up to house people who are experiencing homelessness are actually housing those who are homeless. And we need to have centralized leadership around this who can coordinate to offer accessible wraparound services. And we need to get that implemented now. But back to what I was saying throughout this interview, these are all systemic issues, and homelessness is a symptom of the fact that we haven't solved those yet. The fact that Austin isn't affordable or livable, and the fact that we haven't properly invested in our community and the services that vulnerable communities need means that people are becoming vulnerable or homeless because they don't have a safety net. So we need to be preventing it from happening in the first place, and we need to connect people to the resources they need right now.
Okay. Leslie? Same.
Well, of course, the city has been working for decades on caring for people who are unhoused. Prior councils have done good work in setting up systems, working with nonprofits and churches on how to bring services to folks. The complexity of homelessness includes mental health issues, and even when resources may be made available for some folks, they may choose not to take advantage of them, or they're suspicious of them. So I think I said something earlier about how complex and multi-layered and immediate the many challenges are in front of the city, and homelessness is one of them. Decriminalizing, like we did last June, removing the ban on camping, we overturned the No Sit, No Lie ordinance and the ban on solicitation. We've done all that. We did all the decriminalization work, but we didn't have we weren't ready for the obvious outcomes of that. All the people that we hadn't been seeing were now visible. I think we have made great strides in order to address that since last fall, when I was one of the council members who brought the additional changes to address those.
Okay, I have a follow-up question, so I'm not cutting you off as much as it seems like I am. This is another question from the public. Council's decision to abolish the public camping ban, which is what you were discussing, to help the homeless has been an intensely debated and polarizing issue in Austin. Do you support new public camping laws, or would you support initiatives to get the issue on the ballot to let Austin voters decide? For context, there was a petition to get that back on the ballot, and that petition wasn't successful.
Right. I supported the decriminalization. I thought we needed to have systems and resources in better at the ready in order to address the obvious outcomes. We did come back in September and October last year to make some changes and to restore some elements to those ordinances. That part gets kind of missed when some of the statewide leadership talk about how poorly we're doing our job here in Austin. And since I don't agree with that assessment, what I would say is it's an ongoing issue. It's not just in Austin, and it's part of our work as government to ensure the health and safety of everybody who lives in our community. That's across the board, no matter where you are in Texas or in any of the states, frankly. And I deeply believe in caring for folks who are down and out. And decriminalizing and helping them is one of the ways that we do that.
Morgan, how do you feel about the public camping ban?
Yeah, so like I said, homelessness should not be criminalized. I support the repeal of the ban, though I think it should have been absolutely paired with wraparound services and immediate housing. And we have to ask ourselves from a societal and from an economic perspective, what does reinstating the ban solve? Does it make homelessness go away, or does it just make it less visible for people who don't want to see it anymore? The reality is that people will still be homeless. We will still have people who are vulnerable and who need our support. And we should treat everybody in our community with dignity and respect. But from an economic perspective, I think we don't realize that when we do criminalize homelessness, we still pay for that as taxpayers. They still go to jail. We still pay for the health care and mental health care and the food that they get there. And it costs a lot more than the services to house and care for them in other ways. So again, no, we don't need to reinstate the camping ban. And we shouldn't. We need to invest and we need to implement this immediately instead of just talking about it.
Okay. Morgan, COVID has shown us the critical importance of the universal, affordable internet connectivity for all. How would you prioritize this and ensure access for all households in our community?
Yeah, so as an educator, I know firsthand what it's like to have disparate access to essential services like internet and devices at home, especially in a situation where students can't go to the classroom. It's exacerbated, really. So this is a top priority for me in thinking about how we build back better after the pandemic. I do know that the state has restrictions on our ability to offer high-speed internet access as a utility, but that doesn't mean that we can't partner with businesses to provide subsidies for our lowest income residents. And we can also continue what we've been doing, which is offering mobile hotspots and offering devices, but that's not a sustainable model. We really need to offer this partnership and subsidize those services for those who can't afford it.
Leslie, how would you prioritize accessible internet?
Well, that was one of the obvious gaps that we saw when COVID hit. And it was pretty clear with the school district that the city was going to need to help ensure that all the students would be able to attend if they needed to do it remotely. I did during the budget bring additional monies to help expand the hours and the resources available at our community centers, primarily on the east side, so that the students would have more space for social distancing while they do their studies. And of course, they have access to the computers and the internet at all of the city community and the rec centers. So that was a big help to the school district. We are also helping them with food supplies. I know that's not internet, but there's other ways that the city is partnering with the school district in order to care for those families who may be falling short.
Okay. And this is the final question. It was also submitted by the public, and I just thought it was interesting.
Is it what is our favorite band?
Sure. What is your favorite band? I can ask whatever question I want. Do you have one? You have to name local bands. This question's terrible. Okay. What is the dynamic that you, or what do you contribute to the dynamic of City Council? And Morgan, what would you contribute to the dynamic of City Council?
That is a really interesting question.
I like it.
I think that what I bring is empathy and a listening ear and a deep familiarity with the district that I'm representing and the trust of the folks in the district. They know they can call me up or talk to me at the grocery store or wave as they're walking down the street and ask for some help. It's not unusual at all for us to take calls and emails from constituents over the weekend and immediately initiate some whatever response is necessary. So I think, and then on the dais, I do try to bring a little bit of a sense of humor because the proceedings can be pretty fraught sometimes. But more than anything, it's a real devotion to mission and the concern and the care that I have for our community and my deep, deep sense of responsibility to the electorate, to all the residents of Austin.
Morgan?
Well, answer the band question by saying that the Eggmen are playing on Sunday at the Far Out Lounge. They've been around Austin forever. I have a ton of favorites, but just wanted to call them out. Yeah, so I bring a fresh perspective because I have a lot of diverse experiences in different communities in Austin. I've worked in the service industry. I worked at Amy's Ice Creams back in the day, and I work at Urban Axes, or did until the pandemic. So I know the vulnerability of the service industry. I've worked as an educator. I've seen the struggle of my students, adult and children, but I've also struggled myself as a public servant who can't afford to buy a home in her district, much less, rent without a roommate. And as a member of the tech community, I've had a lot of experience with using data to make informed decisions, project and program management, and bringing diverse groups together to come up with effective, innovative solutions to our problems. But more than that, I'm in touch with all of these communities. I know how to have conversations with people whose political ideology or whose values don't necessarily align with mine. And I know how to find common ground and make sure that every voice is represented. But I also think as a bilingual Spanish speaker, I bring an extra dose of diverse representation so that, the large community of Hispanic and Latinx residents in District 7 have their voices heard too.
And Leslie, in the interest of fairness, I'm sorry, what is your favorite band?
I have so many.
It was your question.
Favorite band. You know what? I was just listening to Alison Krauss the other day, and then Mary Chapin Carpenter. But I'm gonna go with Lyle Lovett.
Okay.
Texas Boy.
Now you'll each have a minute for your closing statements, and I think Morgan, you get to start this time.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate a few things to everybody. One is I have really deep roots in this city, not just because I live here and grew up here and went to school here and work here, but because I've worked with so many diverse communities and I know how to have conversations and come up with solutions that work for everybody. But the other thing that I want to point out is every topic we discussed this evening is not a new issue for Austin. These are issues that we have been facing for years and in some cases decades. The solutions and the strategies that we've been using through all this time obviously haven't been working. Otherwise, we would have moved the needle on these issues and we would see improvement. What we need is a fresh perspective. We need comprehensive solutions. We need critical thinking and problem-solving skills to tackle these situations in a better way. that not only addresses them effectively, but also makes sure that everybody is included in the conversation and is a part of the leadership process so that this can be a more livable and equitable city for everybody.
Thank you. Leslie?
Well, thanks to you all for inviting me to the forum. I appreciate the chance to talk about my record representing District 7 on this council and answer questions on issues that matter to all of us. In addition, of course, to the issues we talked about today was the historic budget that we approved in August that continues our investment in Austin's quality of life. We've expanded resources and housing for those who don't have any. We've improved access to parks and libraries and supported our public schools through childcare options and tutoring and family support services. This is a progressive council and it continues to do so much for our residents. So I thank you for inviting me to participate in the forum. The news outlets like the Austin Monitor and KUT provide needed independent reporting for Austin. The reporters, y'all do really important work, and I truly hope all of y'all are staying healthy and staying safe, and I'm here for you to hear your concerns and to help with them. This is to all the residents in Austin. We're in it together. And I have a call up to action for everybody. Stay safe, stay engaged, be sure you're registered to vote, and then by all means, please go out and vote. Early voting starts October 13, and the election is on November 3. So I'll see you at the polls.
Yes, thank you. And thank you both for joining us today. I was also going to encourage everybody to vote. In addition to early voting starting on October 13th, starting tomorrow, you can drop off your mail-in ballots at designated locations in Travis County. You can find out more information about that on the Travis County Clerk's website. And you can find out a lot more information about the elections at the Austin Monitor and at KUT. And I think that's it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. It was great to speak with both of you tonight.
Bye, Liz.
Bye.
Bye, Morgan.
Bye.